Jack the Ripper was a notorious serial killer whose name has been a mystery for a long time. In other words, up until now. Yes. It's amazing that DNA from a shawl found at the scene of one of his crimes has found a 100% match. A person who saw the man kill Catherine Eddowes in 1888 stood right next to him. He knew what he saw. The cops knew what he saw, but he wouldn't say anything. For more than 100 years, no one knew the reason. It wasn't money or fear. It was a lot more complex than that. In a later letter, senior police said they knew for sure who Jack the Ripper was. They wrote his name down in secret notes and tracked him to an asylum. After that, they closed the case for good. What happened in that room where people signed in, and why did the witness leave? You'd be shocked by the truth. Before dawn on Friday, August 31, 1888, while London was still asleep, the killings started in silence and with no warning. Around 3:40 a.m., a cart driver named Charles Cross saw a form lying in what is now Durward Street, which used to be Bucks Row. As he got closer, he saw that it was Marion Nichols's body. She had 5 kids and was 42 years old. She had been turned away from a hotel less than an hour before because she didn't have the 4 pence needed to stay there. 2 cuts had been made in her throat, one so deep that it cut through all the flesh to the vertebrae. A sharp object had been used to attack her belly, leaving a wound so bad that her intestines stuck out. What's even scarier is that many of these injuries weren't found until the morgue opened later. Because she had already been washed, which was an early sign of how limited forensics were back then. The fighting got worse just 8 days later, on September 8. Annie Chapman's body was found in the garden of 29 Hanbury Street at 6 a.m. When doctors saw what had been done to her, they were shocked. She was 47 years old. Her uterus, parts of her bladder, and her vagina had been taken out. Her throat had been cut and her belly had been fully opened. Dr. George Bagster Phillips looked at the body and said that the innards seemed to have been cut out all at once with a very sharp blade that was at least 6 to 8 inches long. At this point, fear really took over because it looked like the killer knew exactly what he was doing. After that, London would never forget that night. Early on Sunday, September 30th, what would become known as the double event took place. At 1 a.m., 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride was discovered in Dutfield's yard off of Burner Street. She had only one clean cut on the throat and had not been mutilated in any other way. She would be the only victim in the story who wasn't struck after that one wound. A lot of people also think the killer was stopped when soon after, a man named Louis Deanschutz pulled his cart into the yard. It had only been 45 minutes when the fear struck again. The body of Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square at 1:15 a.m. by P.C. Edward Watkins. This time, the violence was very bad. Her face had been cut up, making her the first person to have facial injuries. It was ripped open in the middle. They took out her intestines and put them over her shoulder. They also took out her left kidney and most of her uterus. A bloody piece of her apron was found in Golston Street, about a third of a mile away. A chalk message nearby said, "The Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing." Because he was afraid of riots, Commissioner Charles Warren had it erased before it could be captured, and destroyed what could have been important proof in the process. After a few weeks, on November 9, 1888, the last official murder happened. At 10:45 a.m., Thomas Bowyer, who worked as an assistant to an owner, opened the door to a small room at 13 Miller's Court and saw something so horrifying that it scared everyone who saw it. Inside was Mary Jane Kelly, who was only 25 years old and the youngest teen killed. She was killed inside, unlike the others, which gave the killer more time. Doctors thought the dismemberment took about 2 hours. The knife went through her throat and into her spine. The nose, cheeks, eyebrows, and ears on her face were partly cut off, making it impossible to recognize her. Both breasts were cut off. A lot of skin and tissue had been cut off of her stomach and legs. Her heart was taken out completely, and were never found. Joseph Barnett, her ex-partner, could only tell who she was by looking at her and hearing her. All of this happened in a place that was already on the edge. In 1888, Whitechapel was a desperate and poor place to live. In London's East End, there were about 900,000 people living, and Whitechapel alone was home to about 250,000. It had 188.6 people per acre, which is almost 4 times the rate in London. In 1891, Charles Booth did a study that showed 37.5% of the people living there were so poor that they couldn't even buy the most basic things. Some streets, like Flower and Dean, were called the worst and most dangerous in the city. 4 out of every 5 children died before they turned 5. In a common boarding house, a bed cost 4 pence a night. On her last night of life, Marion Nichols did not have that much money. The police thought that there were about 62 brothels and about 1,200 prostitutes of a very low class working in the area. All 5 of the victims had to turn to prostitutes to make money, and the killer took advantage of their weakness. Deep social strain made things even more difficult. There were between 45,000 and 50,000 new Jewish residents in the area. Many of them were running away from pogroms in Russia and Poland. Their presence made it harder to get jobs in homes, which made people angry and suspicious. There was a Yiddish theater star named Jacob Adler who lived through it. He later said that he had never seen such poverty, not even in Russia or the worst bad neighborhoods in New York. Fear filled the streets, but the police investigation was hard to see from the outside. Inspector Frederick George Aberline led the effort on the ground. He had been a police officer for 14 years and knew his way around Whitechapel's winding streets well. But the people in charge above him were a mess. This was the day before Annie Chapman was killed, September 7th. Robert Anderson, who was in charge of the Criminal Investigation Department, went to Switzerland for sick leave. The chief, Thomas Arnold, took time off on September 2nd. James Monroe quit as head of the CID on the same day that Marion Nichols was killed. In November 1888, Commissioner Sir Charles Warren quit. He had already been criticized for asking that the Golston Street message be erased. Even with these issues, the cops put a lot of effort into the search. 143 more cops in plainclothes were sent out. More than 2,000 people who lived in boarding houses were asked questions. All over London, about 80,000 circulars were sent out. The tools were still not there, though. Fingerprinting wasn't used for real until 1901. There was no blood type. It was not common to take pictures of crime scenes outside. Without these tools, the police could only hope to catch the killer in the act or get proof of guilt. Rivalries between jurisdictions made things worse. Catherine Eddowes was killed in Mitre Square, which was the job of the City of London Police. The Metropolitan Police were in charge of most killings in London. The two groups worked separately and didn't share information well. Even worse for future investigators, most of the City of London police files related to the case were destroyed during the Blitz in World War II. The famous letters kept popping up in the story of Jack the Ripper like strange sparks, and each one made things even more confusing for the police. It started with the Dear Boss letter on September 25, 1888. 2 days later, it got to the Central News Agency. No one had ever seen the name Jack the Ripper before that letter. The author made fun of the cops, said he was ahead of them, and talked about ripping women until he was caught. He even joked that he might send someone in with their ears cut off for fun. A sick kind of playfulness filled the tone, and people responded right away. It was printed by reporters. People read about it in whispers. So the name Jack the Ripper became part of history, as if it had been waiting for that moment. Soon after, on October 1, 1888, a postcard showed up. People later called the message on it the Sexy Jackie postcard. It talked about 2 events and hinted that one of the victims squealed before they died. What was scary was that the murders it talked about had not yet been publicly reported. People thought about this for years, wondering if the author really did know something. Then, in 1931, a reporter named Fred Best is said to have said that he and a co-worker wrote both letters just to keep the story going so that they could sell more newspapers. Everything was cast in a dark shadow by that statement. They were still interested in one piece of mail, though. On October 16, 1888, George Lusk, who was in charge of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, got a small box with a note from hell inside it. The note had half of a preserved human kidney inside it. The author said he had eaten the other half of a kidney that he had taken from a victim. This one felt different. It wasn't signed by Jack the Ripper. It didn't sound smooth or finished. The kidney was looked at by Dr. Thomas Openshaw. They found that it came from a woman with Bright's disease who was about 45 years old. Catherine Eddowes was killed on September 31, 1888, and her left kidney was taken out. The state of her other kidney was the same. The From Hell letter stayed living long after the others did because of that one detail. People were upset by the letters, so the cops tried to settle the case with their own ideas. Sir Melville Macnaghten wrote a memo in February 1894 listing the people he thought were the most important. Investigators still used the general framework he made. His first pick was Montague John Druitt, a lawyer born in 1857 whose body was found in the Thames on December 31, 1888. Macnaghten thought that Druitt's family was looking into him. Still, he said Druitt was a doctor who was 41 years old when in fact he was only 31. Cricket records showed Druitt was in Dorset the day after the Nichols murder. The case was quickly weakened by those events. Aaron Kosminski was another name on the note. He was a Polish Jew who lived in Whitechapel. Macnaghten said Kosminski hated women, especially whores, and had mental health problems that were made worse by years of bad habits. He thought Kosminski was likely to be violent and kept him as a possible suspect. Michael Ostrog, the third suspect, was said to be a dangerous Russian doctor, but later proof showed that he had been in jail in France during all the murders, which took him out of the picture completely. The case was still not clear, even with these candidates. Sir Robert Anderson wrote in his autobiography in 1910 that the police had pretty much fixed everything. He said that a witness had recognized the killer as soon as they saw him, but the witness refused to speak. In the margins of Anderson's book, Chief Inspector Donald Swanson wrote notes that named the suspect as Kosminski. He also said why the witness didn't say anything. The witness, who was probably Joseph Lawenda, was Jewish, and he didn't want to be the one to put another Jewish man to death. At that time, the truth was hidden. The stories got stranger as the years went by. People were very sure that Sir William Gull had killed prostitutes to hide the fact that Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, had quietly married a Catholic woman. When Stephen Knight wrote this in 1976, it was a big hit with readers. But papers kept by the royal family showed that the prince was never in London on any of the dates of the murders. He was in Scotland, Yorkshire, or York. Later, the key source for the story said he made it all up, which put an end to the plot. When novelist Patricia Cornwell said in 2002 that painter Walter Sickert was the killer, it led to a new idea. And she showed DNA from letters and watermarks on paper. But Sickert could have been in France at the time of the killings, and the DNA results only matched a lot of people. A lot of experts also think the letters she used were fakes. Anna Grutzner-Robbins, one of the most well-known experts on Sickert, made it very clear that there was no proof at all. The letters stayed a mystery, the suspects came and went, and the wilder theories lost their power when real proof came along. So many people wanted to change the story, so it stayed jumbled. Just like it did in 1888, the truth kept slipping away, going from one idea to the next. It was always just out of reach, but people kept moving forward. A man who thought he had finally solved the puzzle of Jack the Ripper's DNA began with a piece of fabric. Edwards, a businessman from Britain, got a silk shawl at auction in 2007. The story that went with it was exciting. Deputy Sergeant Amos Simpson was said to have taken the shawl from the scene of Catherine Eddowes' death and then passed it down through his family for many years. Edwards thought it might have the killer's DNA on it, so he asked Dr. Jari Lavhilainen of Liverpool John Moores University to check it out. In September 2014, Edwards told the press that DNA tests had proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. Blood on the blanket was said to belong to Karen Miller, who was Catherine Eddowes' great-great-great-granddaughter, and epithelial cells from a semen stain were said to belong to a woman who was related to Kosminski's sister Matilda through her mother's side of the family. An article by Lavhilainen and David Miller of the University of Leeds was released in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, Volume 65, Issue 1, pages 295 to 303, in 2019. This was 5 years after the original work. They said that their work was the most organized and advanced DNA study of the case that had been done so far. Their phenotypic analysis showed that the suspect had brown hair and eyes, which was in line with what some eyewitnesses said. They said they had identified haplogroup T1A1, which is popular among Russian Jews. At first glance, everything seemed to be in order, like science had finally closed the file. The DNA case starts to fall apart when you look at it more closely, though. One of the first big problems in forensic genetics came from its very core. Scientist Professor Sir Alec Jeffreys, who came up with DNA fingerprinting, and other experts noticed that Llewellyn had recorded a mutation as 3HUM14.1C and said that this variety only showed up in 1 in 290,000 people. In fact, 315.1C is the right designation. This type of DNA is found in more than 90% of people with European roots. With that one change, a genetic marker that was thought to be rare becomes very widespread, which destroys the idea that the Shaw profile was unique or special. Things got worse after that. The writers of the 2019 study didn't put out full mitochondrial DNA sequences. They gave the information in the form of colored boxes in a graph, so no other chemist could check the nucleotides. They said that the UK Data Protection Act prevented them from giving out full codes when they were asked. This reason was pushed back on by Walter Parson, an expert in mitochondrial DNA from Innsbruck Medical University. The speaker said that mitochondrial DNA patterns don't really pose a privacy risk, and made it clear that these kinds of scenes should have been included because readers wouldn't have been able to judge the outcome on their own without them. There were also clear contradictions in the paper that were hard to miss. Number 7 is one of the most important pictures. It shows that the suspect sample and the blanket sample had two different nucleotides. SWG-DAM standards are used in the paper. They say that if there are two or more differences, the samples can be ruled out as coming from the same source. That is, the number points to exclusion, while the text points to a match. Even worse, when the editor of the journal later asked the authors to provide the original raw data in answer to complaints from outside sources, the authors said that the data were no longer available due to problems with the instruments and other issues. Concerns about the study were raised by the Journal of Forensic Sciences in September 2024. This is a very serious red flag in the academic world. Even if the data had been perfect, the shawl itself is a headache when it comes to contamination and keeping track of who has what. For more than 136 years, people have touched, shown, and passed it around. Photography has been done while people have touched it with their bare hands. Bleach has been used on some spots. The worst part is that two relatives of Catherine Eddowes spent 3 days in the same room with the shawl in 2007. This makes it almost certain that their DNA will have been transferred. Adam Rutherford, a geneticist, didn't hold back when he talked about this. He called it terrible science and terrible history. I also can't prove for sure that the shawl came from the crime scene. The cops did not keep a record of it in 1888. Amos Simpson worked for the N Division, which was in charge of Islington. The death of Eddowes, on the other hand, happened in the City of London police area. Sotheby's looked at the shawl and said it was from the Edwardian era, which was after the Ripper killings, sometime between 1901 and 1910. So the DNA claim is based on a piece of cloth whose history isn't clear and whose surface is full of current DNA. Before you can understand why Aaron Kosminski is so important to this story, you need to take a step back and look at his life. He was born on September 11, 1865, in the town of Kładowa in Congress, Poland, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time. Aaron's father was a tailor and died when he was 9 years old. Years after Tsar Alexander II was killed in 1881, there were waves of violence against Jews across the empire. A lot of families fled west, and Aaron was one of them. He got to London around 1881 and lived with cousins in Whitechapel. He lived with his siblings, who were his brother Wolf and sister Matilda, in the same poor neighborhood where Jack the Ripper would later kill people. Kosminski had a job as a hairdresser in London. By 1891, though, his doctors saw that he hadn't done any work in years. One report said that he lived in the heart of the district where the murders happened. With addresses on Providence Street and Greenfield Street, he was very close to all 5 of the main murder sites. Things were already getting worse for his emotional health at that point. Most modern doctors who have looked into his case think he had paranoid schizophrenia. Some disturbing habits and beliefs are written down in medical notes. He said he heard sounds that were bothering him. He believed that someone was attempting to poison him. He ate bread that he found in the trash and would only drink from faucets. He wouldn't wash or take a bath. Things kept getting worse for him. 1891, he made a knife threat against his sister, which was the last straw that got him kicked out of the house. Kosminski was said to be crazy on February 7, 1891, and was sent to Coney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, which at the time was the biggest asylum in Europe. In 1894, 3 years later, he was moved to Leavesden Asylum. He stayed there until March 24, 1919, when he died. At the age of 53. He was only 96 pounds after decades of not eating well and not taking care of himself. They said that gangrene of the leg was the cause of death. Interestingly, even though some police officers later said he had strong suicidal impulses, the asylum records don't support the idea that he was very violent. During his 28 years in an institution, there was only one clear violent event. That happened in January 1892, when he tried to hit a staff member with a chair. He was a very troubled person, but the records that we have don't show that he was a serial killer. Longer-term investigations into the Whitechapel killings have also been sad and secret. No one has ever been able to answer or close the case of Jack the Ripper. No one was ever charged or found guilty. Scotland Yard has never officially agreed with any one idea. Some important parts of the written record have been lost over time. A lot of City of London police files were destroyed by bombs during World War II. The Public Record Office already knew that the Metropolitan Police suspects' files were missing in 1983. The file on Emma Elizabeth Smith was lost. There is no police file that is only about Kosminski that has been found, even though top officers have said in the past that he was one of their main suspects. As a retired agent, Trevor Marriott tried to cut through some of this darkness in 2011 by asking to see the uncensored ledgers from 1888 to 1892 at Scotland Yard. About 36,000 records, including the names of informants, were kept in these ledgers. The answer he got to his question shows how private the records still are. A top officer spoke in public behind a screen so that no one could see who he was. Even after more than 100 years, Scotland Yard was able to make a strong case that releasing these ledgers would put informants and basic police ideals at risk. Because of this, the records stayed secret, and scholars were once again told to wait. They could see everything the cops knew and when they knew it. When you put it all together, you get a confusing picture. On paper, Aaron Kosminski is still one of the more likely suspects. There was murder going on near where he lived. Officers in charge had already marked him as a possible suspect, so the cops knew who he was. At least one witness seems to have been able to identify the person. Even though the witness wouldn't come forward, the case never went to court. But even if you take out the false DNA claims, there is still only weak proof against him. He can't be tied to a tool. It doesn't say anything. It is not clear that there is a physical link between him and any of the bodies. Also, the general limits of mitochondrial DNA are important in this case. A clear difference in mitochondrial DNA can show that a suspect is not the source of a sample, which is a great way to rule people out. As long as millions of people share the same mitochondrial makeup, it can't positively point to a single person as the source. Even if the shawl was perfectly preserved and there was no question about where it came from, a match in mitochondrial DNA would only show that Kosminski could not be ruled out as the source, not that he was definitely the killer. In real life, the shawl is very dirty and its past is not clear, so even that weak claim doesn't hold up. The disagreement between top officers makes things even less clear. In 1910, Sir Robert Anderson wrote that one knew who the Ripper was and that Kosminski was likely the person. Sir Henry Smith, who worked with him and was on the City of London side of the case, laughed at this claim and harshly rejected it. Sir Melville Macnaghten made things even more confusing by writing that no one ever saw the Whitechapel murderer, which goes against the idea of a clear witness identification. There were times when these guys did different jobs on the same set of murders. Still, they couldn't agree on what the cops had really found. That's how things really stand after 137 years. People still talk about Jack the Ripper in Whitechapel, but no one knows who did it. In the late 1800s, forensic work was very unstable. This story shows that even today, science can go wrong when it starts with bad examples, claims that aren't backed up by evidence, or claims that are too sure of themselves. People also have a strong need to give a face and name to a problem that hasn't been fixed. As of 2025, Russell Edwards is still pushing for a new inquest into the death of Catherine Eddowes. He wants the court system to look at the evidence again, but there isn't any clear physical proof. There is no doubt that the Whitechapel murders will stay a mystery for many years to come, no matter how many times people try to put an end to it.